Go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the seventh ever Amos Private Call. My name is Dominic Timel. I'm a founder and contributor at the Solvio Foundation. And we've gathered here today to discuss the product of Amos. So without further ado, let's get to it. So I posted that I have like a big idea to change stuff and everything. And it's really good that we had it, that we are having the call today evening. I've had the chance to do a lot of research. I spent the whole day doing research on this particular idea, and I think the best decision for now would be to shelve it. Nevertheless, I'll tell you what the idea was and why to shelve it. So the proposal was essentially to go with a decentralized stack. So it's something that we spent some time thinking about and talking about, like back in March. I think this was before anyone joined from you guys. It was when it was me and getting help or advice during discussions with some of my friends who are still in the Slack channel, but unfortunately they're not active because they have other things to do. And we essentially decided to, for now, go with the centralized stack. And so this was a kind of a second attempt for me to really think about it and make sure that it's a good decision. Why did I sort of second chance that idea? The reason is I had a very brief idea, which was the following. In one of the product calls, actually, it's an idea that came from one of the product calls, number 2 or number 3. We discussed, like, very briefly using proof of work to eliminate spam. And so that's really where it clicked in, is I was like, okay, so we can have a decentralized database. And essentially, the reputation model that we came up with, I think it's pretty darn solid. About that, I think that requires change. So, so the reputation system we came up with, I think that's pretty darn solid. But the thing that our system sort of doesn't handle at the moment is spam or denial of service or Sybil attack or whatever you want to call it, for registrations mainly, right? And so that was sort of the idea, is for the registration, require people to solve a small proof of work puzzle, and then bam, the whole thing just works out. And so I did a lot of research on this, and I think that the reason it's not a good idea is, okay, so even before I get into why it's not a good idea, let me tell you the other possible proposal. So proof of work is great, but it has a lot of limitations. Number one, would you require the same amount of computation to be done when somebody registers on mobile as like through our API? So that doesn't make sense, right? Because mobile has much less of computational power, so it would not be proportionate. But most importantly, proof of work is very easy to get by. So the first reason is actually it's very cheap to expend CPU on, whether it's your own servers or on DigitalOcean. Electricity is very cheap. So even if we require, it's just incomparable to what a mobile device would have to be. I guess this could get like, I'm thinking of a solution right now as I talk about it, which is for mobile apps actually don't require proof of work, because there, the system is pretty much under our control. I think the app has potentially access to some kind of unique identifier for the phone, and I think one phone per account, like require a new phone for every new account, is a pretty good. It's a pretty good defense against Sybil attack. So Sybil attack is this idea of people generating a bunch of accounts and therefore spamming our system. And so the idea is to defend against it. You want to increase the costs of attacking. So sort of the most easy one would be require email address, but then you have to do some kind of verification, right? Which already is like centralized because email servers are centralized. Slightly better would be maybe do something like CAPTCHA, which was essentially the second idea, like CAPTCHA. And then proof of work, which is kind of a floating thing, right? Because you can set the parameters to require to require anything. So that's sort of the idea, is to raise the costs of creating new accounts. Now, I've already kind of discussed proof of work a little bit. Let me say one more thing to that. A lot of these hackers, the way they do things is they use botnets, and you can either rent out botnets. I posted something in one of the channels recently in random. You can also use illegal botnets, so hack botnets. And one of the problems there is you basically have unlimited computation because you're running it on hacked computers, computers that have been infected by viruses or malware. And that's essentially also the counter argument to the CAPTCHA thing is, well, that you can also require hacked computers to solve CAPTCHAs for you, and then you can sort of import that into creating accounts for our app. And then there's another thing about CAPTCHA, which is it's centralized, right? So somebody has to decide, the server has to decide whether the CAPTCHA was solved correctly. Now, I did look into decentralized CAPTCHA solutions. Something came up like DLive and stuff like that, but nothing good enough that we would be happy to go with it. So that was essentially the big background. And then the two most important things I wanted to say is, I guess, the reason we shouldn't go with it for now is several. The UX is slightly worse. I don't think it's a lot worse, but it's potentially slightly worse. If we did go with a purely cryptographic solution, then that does require some kind of MetaMask. It requires some kind of storing of private keys, and then a related problem to that is what if people forget their private keys, right? That's always a big problem in these decentralized solutions. So it's both. Another thing would be it would possibly be harder to fundraise, but then I guess the most important things are scalability, right? So there exist even decentralized databases like OrbitDB and GunDB, but nobody really knows whether they're production ready. And
BigchainDB is also there.
Ani?
BigchainDB is also there, so that's a lot of people use it in production, us as well.
Yeah, but BigchainDB is very different. So I read about those guys as well, and they're more about transferring of assets. At least that's what the system is meant for. You can register. They essentially only allow two operations in their database, which is create a new asset and transfer an asset. So I think they pivoted recently. I actually know some guys from BigchainDB. They're based in Berlin. I met them at our co-working space.
Trent and all are running it.
Yeah. So I guess the whole thing can be summarized as, if you allow very easy onboarding or very easy entry into the app, i.e. you don't require proof of work or CAPTCHAs or stuff like that, then it's potentially exploitable by hackers. But it's like we don't want to sacrifice on how easy it is to get into our app. So I'd rather take the risk of doing it this way and find a solution later, rather than restrict how easy it is to onboard people into the application, which absolutely doesn't make sense from a business perspective. And so then I came across a bunch of centralized solutions. Like there's questions on Stack Exchange. Hey guys, how do I protect my public register API from DOS attacks? And then there's people giving them solutions. As well as there's even companies providing this as a service, which is pretty freaking cool. So that's sort of the first overarching point I wanted to make, and then the second one was I think we should still keep these ideas in mind. In particular, for Amos, we could think about how to like sort of make our database as readable as possible. So do some kind of like database, like real-time database dump through some socket or HTTP, whatever, so that anybody could fork or clone our database. So this is common for nonprofit projects or other sort of free software that they allow. They have a fully public database that allows anyone to sort of clone it or whatnot, and then we could, figure out how to make sure that we're not the only one that's transferring all the data to other people, and that they could talk to themselves, the nodes, etc. And then, but even more importantly, for I think for the Solvio product, that's where I think we might revisit these ideas and think about them again. And the reason is, the Amos product is much more of a much more easier for central, like much more tense or fitting for centralization, because we have probably more information, probably larger data set, like more storage costs here, but most importantly, we require sort of algorithms to run on it, the search algorithm, and then we have the friendship, the whole social network functionality. So that stuff is very hard to do in decentralized databases. And so here, let me just quickly say the solution to the search aspect was intended to be that for search, that part is sort of centralized. So the part that would be public would be the metadata about the resources. But then you would also very likely create an account with one of the Amos providers, one of the Amos nodes, that would store your personal information as to what you know, what you don't know, self-attestations, as well as all of your preferences. And it would also have the database cloned, and it would also allow you to run the searches. So that was like a very interesting idea, to decouple it, like a sort of two-tier system, kind of like blockchain. You have nodes and then you have miners. So here you would also have nodes, and then you would have the miners, which would be essentially storing the personal information and running the search queries. So that was meant to be the solution there. For the Solvio product, I think the storage costs are much lower, but additionally, it tends itself much more towards peer-to-peer technology. So, the whole idea of Solvio is you submit some of your creations, and other people would be able to rate you on how well you demonstrated your understanding of the topic using a Schelling game sort of thing, or an Amos game, whatnot. And it would be pretty cool if this whole thing was like actual ownership. So you submit something, and 5 people say that you understand it with some certain level. Well, they sign it with their private key, and now you actually have, a hash, or not a hash, but you actually have a hex string that actually represents the signatures of those people that they testify that you know it, right? And then you could get a list of all these hexes, and then that would essentially be your Solvio degree. So it wouldn't even require visiting like a website to check your academic profile. You could literally own it in the form of owning the signatures. So that's just the last 2 things I wanted to say. We might revisit these ideas when we think about how to make our database as open as possible, as well as how to implement Solvio in a best approaches possible. Let me just finally say maybe 2 quick counter arguments, because I like to share everything that's going through my head. So there are also, like, not having everything public gives you more flexibility, right? It increases the stuff you can do with the application. and at the moment, zero knowledge and zero knowledge proofs, as well as sort of fully homomorphic encryption. That stuff is just too difficult or too early stage to use right now. So how does private stuff make the app more rich? Well, for Solvio, I've been thinking about this problem for a while actually. You submit a project, a creation. One sec, let me take a drink. Okay. So for the Solvio product, you submit a creation, and essentially what's stopping you from teaming up with 2 of your friends or 10 of your friends, and that they immediately go and they immediately submit that you understood it very, very well. So essentially, I'm already starting to think that's some sort of centralized system where we actually pair up people randomly, right? Where you don't get to choose who you rate, because that's obviously very, very cheatable. Is from the way I said, it's quite obvious. It's at least seems very obvious that it's a much better solution. And even also for Amos. So the way we're thinking about the application right now from a front and back end perspective is we don't actually show the users or anyone for that matter what the metadata on the resources are right now. And the reason is it makes it better, it makes it more secure if everybody doesn't have that knowledge, right? So if you don't have that knowledge, then it turns it into sort of a hash map shelling game. But if you did have that knowledge, well, then you would just always vote for the most popular, most common option, assuming that you think that that's going to get as well in the future the most votes. So it would actually be gameable if it was public. So I just wanted to say these 2 counter arguments. So think about how to make our databases as open as possible, both from the read side API and from the write side API, but also keep in mind that it shouldn't sacrifice, hopefully, the functionality or the security of the application. Anyone have a few comments about this?
So right now the database that you're going to use was Neo4j itself, right?
Indeed.
Did that change or?
No. So that was going to change when I started thinking about this. But since the conclusion of the thing is that we don't go with it, then the plan is still the same. We go with Neo4j.
All right. So I'm a little confused as to what all things changed, because I think
nothing's changed so far. So I just told you guys my thoughts. Want to tell you my thoughts, how everything worked, how proof of work, CAPTCHA, securing APIs, like what I was reading about, and then sort of the final overarching conclusions from that. Because of this, we don't go with a decentralized approach, but there's some stuff to think about, which is like something to think about in the future, right? So I just wanted to give you guys like a full update, but the main conclusion is that we're not going with a decentralized approach for now. Make sense?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask something.
Yeah.
So how you are going to stop the duplicacy of resources? Like if
Sorry, say that again.
How you are going to prevent the duplicacy of resources?
I don't understand. How we're going to provide the what?
How will you prevent the duplicacy of resources? See, if someone is submitted the resources already and the another one is going to submit it again, so how will you prevent that?
So what exactly do you mean? Who's going to submit what and why? Who's going to submit it again?
See, there is I have a blog about something. I'm explaining something about that. Okay, so one is me, who is the author of that blog, and I have submitted this resource on your on your platform. Okay, so there can be some other guy as well who is trying to submit the same resource again, but he is not the author of that. So how will you solve that problem?
Oh, perfect question. So, okay. So let me answer two questions actually. First one, how do we solve like sort of the spam problem in the current state since we're not changing anything? So first of all, at the moment, everybody we assume goes through our front end. So we solve that using regular centralized techniques. If people use bots or whatnot, or if we later on have a public API and it's being abused, then there's many techniques how to do that. You can put a CAPTCHA on the website. You can limit sort of API access regarding IP from various IPs. You can actually set up API keys for and then approve them or disapprove them depending on how they're being used. You can do quite a lot of things.
Okay.
And then the second question, I think what you were actually asking was okay. So assuming every user is an actual human, then how do you solve the duplication of resource submissions in the system? So that is I think it's connected a little bit to this point, but we're going to do some processing on our servers. So if you submit a link to Coursera course, and then if somebody else submits a link to Coursera course, obviously it's automatically going to sync them up because, well, it's the same exact URL. And we're also going to do some processing regarding equivalence classes between URLs. So for example, YouTube has two URL formats. We're gonna code that in that they're equivalent by default, so that we don't have separate resources representing the same online resource.
Okay. Got it.
Perfect. Yep. Perfect. I'm glad that answered the question. So we discussed things we're not changing, but I think nevertheless, sort of this whole thing of questioning our specs before we begin working on them, I think it was very fruitful, not only for the two things we realized we have to keep in mind, but also because I think that there's some things that we can take forward. So let's go through them right now. These are the proposed sort of changes. So the first one is okay. Let me start by going through kind of a longer post that I posted on Saturday, I believe. So in the last call, we discussed two big approaches. The first one is we use some bots or scrapers to scrape the web or to sort of automate or automatize our tasks, and we seed the resources ourselves. And the other approach is that we build a community that adds the resources. And we of course do it as well as us, like human beings. And I think we should only go with the second approach. And the reason is, the first one, it already selects automatically by definition. It selects the resources that users are interested in. I claim that which sort of logic we would find to seed resources ourselves, we would always end up with a bloated database and we would still miss good resources. But nevertheless, the idea of automating stuff, I think, is fruitful because we should leverage technology to help the users as much as possible. Essentially, we want to get the most information with as little human input as possible. And I think it really makes sense to get rid of format, price, and position and do that on our end. So that was really the main sort of the main sweet point of the last call. Is I was really criticizing our requirement that users vote on format, price, and possibly on position when I think this is something that we can do on ourselves. Like, how hard is it to do a HTTP request to Amazon and find the price of an ebook, or to to just read the domain and find that it's either Amazon or it's YouTube, and therefore we know that it's either a book or a video. So I think that's a really good idea. So that's the first point. Second point. So how do we encode topics and learning dependencies? Should they be separate or possibly in one field? So, if you think about it, we're encoding some actually kind of deep insights or knowledge into how learning resources work. But anyways, that's beside the point. So the way we have it now is we have a list of topics, and we have sort of a list of learning dependency triplets, where each triplet is composed of the strength, 1 out of 5, the topic, the learning dependency itself, what is it? Is it algebra? Is it geometry? As well as the level, how many hours you need to spend on that. So what's the required level, recommended level for that topic? Now, I claim that there's just one way to encode this overarching idea and I haven't thought about this yet, so I'm just going to propose one other solution just to show you guys that there exist other ones. So here it goes. So instead of having 2 different fields, you could have just one field. I don't know, let's call it topics or whatever. And it would always be, obviously the topic. So and then maybe also it would include the difficulty. Okay. And maybe also the weight. So essentially this is realizing that topics and learning dependencies are very much interchangeable. By the way, these realizations that I do, I obviously don't do them somehow a priori. There's no, at the moment, theoretical frameworks to think about learning resources. I don't think anyone has ever worked on that in history. I think we're really the first ones working on this, because at least if you guys know of anything, then refer us to it, because it would be great to learn people or resources that are working on the same thing. But I don't know much other work on this. So I do this not a priori, but I do this by reading learning resources and really thinking deeply about how to encode the information that's in them. And in particular, the metadata about them. And in particular, I realized that very often, if something is a learning dependency, then it's a topic as well. And vice versa. So maybe it's a better idea to just do one thing, which is you have the list of topics, and the difficulty is how much in that topic do you already need to know, right? So there could be many, and maybe some of them is 0. Maybe there's, okay, so I'll give you an example. So let's say there's a resource called JavaScript for C++ developers, which there actually is. And so there maybe the topic would be JavaScript. The difficulty would be 0, because we're not requiring the person to know JavaScript, and weight is irrelevant. And then maybe there will be a topic of C++, because maybe it will reference C++. So I guess you're also learning C++, but then maybe that has a difficulty now, right? Because you already need to know C++. It's not like it's a 101 article, 101 resource. It's not like it's a beginner's resource for that particular topic. So that's just something I wanted to outline, and I will think about this more, and I think it will take a few hours, 2 to 3 hours, and let's reconnect tomorrow. Next points. Okay, so I also came across quite a few projects that are trying to do very similar stuff to us. In fact, I came across even more after this. So here's one that looks very, very similar. Nonprofit, online, open learning community, where you can learn stuff. And then it's so interesting how if you start reading about these stuff on Wikipedia, then you can just pretty much endlessly endlessly sort of find new projects. Like now you can look what Open Badges is doing, right? And then there's like even more stuff. Like somewhere I found the Open Knowledge Society, Open Knowledge Foundation, and they do like, yeah. And so these guys, again, global nonprofit, and they also do conferences and stuff. So again, I think about 2 to 3 hours of my time will take to look up all of these guys, categorize them, and decide which ones we want to get in touch with, because I think we should do that. I think so that's something that I will be working on tomorrow. Okay, and then the fourth point that I have over here, I don't know why it's number 1. It should be the same as these 3. And this is very, very interesting. So, by the way, sorry for me talking so much in this call, but yeah, it's just a lot going through my head, and I wanted to share everything with you guys. So I also thought about what a learning resource is, and essentially, I think there's a scale of like theoretical to applied stuff. And then I also thought about how to divide resources by their type. And I think the most popular that we'll have is something like, just regular stuff. Now, I think that in general, courses are more likely to be the most theoretical and the most actually the longest as well. Books, somewhere in the middle. And so I think it goes, courses, problem sets, like technical math or CS questions, whatnot, books, videos, podcasts, articles. That I think is a ordering of the median sort of value on the scale of how theoretical and applied it is. And what's very interesting is that this scale is actually mapped 1-to-1 to how long the resource is. I think if we do ordering of how long the resource is, I think it would pretty much be the same ordering. So there's some very deep correlation between how theoretical a resource is and how long a resource is, which is something to think about. And also the cool thing is that this categorization from what I thought applies to both humanities and sciences, which is something that we always want to keep in mind when we're doing these thinkings, is that we really are taking the hard step of working on both sciences and humanities at once. So we want everything that we come up with to apply to both fields. Now, and then I created this concept of an applicability curve, which is essentially the knowledge that you learn, how fast can you apply it? So for the most applied stuff, which I think in the ordering was articles, you learn it and then you can immediately apply it, and so that's it. But then for something like courses, whether it's business or programming, like computer science or whatnot, usually, by the way, can you guys mute, please? For stuff that takes longer, is more theoretical. Usually you can apply it immediately, but usually sort of the applicability sort of levels off, but like it has a longer tail, right? So it's just like that's why we study theoretical stuff. That's why people study theoretical computer science at college, because it helps them even 10 years from now, right? While just learning React is going to help you now, but it's not going to give you the context for what you're working on. So that's just something that I think is cool to think about. Now, and then I try to tie everything together to what we're working on, and our purpose and our unique selling point and our differentiation, blah, blah, blah. Let me take a drink. And essentially, I believe that what I said here is sort of does like okay. I'll try to formulate my thoughts better. I think you can use any learning preference with Amos. And so that's really the great thing is its flexibility. So this stuff, like Amos abstracts away your learning preferences, right? Like it's a search engine essentially, as well as a social network. But what you learn there, whether it's theoretical stuff or applied stuff, that's completely up to you. So while for me personally, the motivation for building Amos was, for example, if you look at YouTube, there is so much good stuff on YouTube, and yet it's in my experience buried deep under piles of shiny and catchy 3-minute junk. So actual good content, and I think we all have experience with this. Have you ever found a video on YouTube that would be really darn good, and it would have like 1,000 views or 100 views, and then you look at another video and maybe it's on the same topic, but it's 3 minutes and has tens of thousands, or even just a short extract of the original video has like many, often multiple times more views. So the internet right now is not a textbook. It's not a what's the right way to say it? It's not the ultimate learning resource that it can really be. Yeah, it's not the ultimate learning platform it can be. And so that's sort of the idea is right now people are using the internet for super school learning outside of school, so non-theoretical learning. But we really, with this whole Solvia project, what we want to do is make the internet possible to also learn theoretical stuff, actual education. So that's for me the motivation to working on this, is to bring up the best resources, even if they last longer, because you can't just compose your entire education of 3-minute junk. Nevertheless, I understand that there's even another argument for Amos, which is the exact reverse, which is to say that regular education is too theoretical, and you can have a much more applied education, which I also believe in this argument. So I believe in both. If you go to a place like Cambridge for computer science, then you might study 5 to 10 fields in extreme depth, whether that's cryptography, graphics, formula verification. You study so many things that are very, very unrelated in such great depth, and then you end up only working in one. And why is that? It's obviously because of the education system from the 13th century. Content provision is tied with credentials. It assumes that you can't educate yourself after you get out of college, and so we might as well teach them everything now that they'll need for the rest of their life, which is obviously very false. So I resonate with both of the arguments for Amos, and they just show how much the world needs this product. So okay, 3 more things. First one, I also love Library Genesis. I have actually started now using it as my ultimate learning resource. So if you combine it with this Android app called Voice Reader, then you can get any book. You can get its both text and audio form, and you can both read and listen, or read or listen, and it's free. I think it's a great thing, especially if we're trying to make education more accessible. Then having unlimited access to textbooks and nonfiction books is absolutely incredible for people that can afford it. So I have a proposal to actually possibly integrate with Library Genesis. So obviously hosting the stuff would be illegal probably, unless our servers are based in a country where this stuff is legal, possibly Russia. I'm not sure. I'm not a lawyer, because that's where they're based. And that's also where Kontakte is, which is, allows you to share multimedia. But what I'm more thinking about is allow the user to set a preference of whether downloading copyrighted content for personal use is legal in their country. So it turns out in the US it's illegal. So using Library Genesis in US is illegal, but I'm pretty sure that in Europe, downloading copyrighted stuff for personal use is legal. So the user could set in their preferences whether or not they reside in a country where downloading these materials for personal use is legal, and then bam, they would be able to search for anything, and we would already give them the EPUB or the PDF like for free directly. Pretty freaking cool. Point number 5. So it's an idea that came up like just today. One thing that so I've done a lot of self-learning, as you guys know. So one thing that I personally found very useful on my self-learning journeys has been to combine things of various mental difficulty. So for a long time now, I've had this concept of like mental difficulties. So if you think of something like a math lecture notes, obviously the mental difficulty there is something different than, I don't know, watching a YouTube video, or listening to a podcast. So mental difficulty is, I guess the most like external way to say would be how long it takes to consume a unit of the resource. Like math lecture notes, one PDF takes a freaking long time because you have to read all the theorems and think about them. Well, maybe if you're reading a children's book, well, maybe one page doesn't take that long. And so it's not in our metadata set at the moment, but we definitely want to have some concept of how mentally difficult this is. Number one, to be able to search for that stuff, but also, and here's the idea, to automatically give several different tiers to the user of different mental difficulties. So that's what I was going to say, is that while self-learning, I found it very, very useful to combine stuff of different mental difficulties. So for example, just one of a million examples. When I was learning cryptography, I was both doing watching the YouTube playlist. Oh, by the way, if you wanna check it out, I can recommend this playlist enough. It's the best resource in the world to learn about cryptography. Probably going to be 1,000 times better than your cryptography lecture at your university. And guess what? It's free. So right. So I was both watching this this course, and I was also reading a book at the same time called The History of Cryptography. Actually, it was called The Code Book, but that's not the point. So, and I found that really, really useful. So, half of the day I would be doing this course, and then the other half I would be reading the history of all of the theorems and techniques and crypto systems that the world has invented. And with cryptography, it was really, really great because for some reason, there's a big correlation between how later it was invented and how complex it is. So the cryptography courses, they actually go quite chronologically. They first discuss stuff that they used in ancient Rome, and they discuss stuff they used in the medieval ages. Then the stuff that was used in the Second World War, and finally, obviously public key cryptography, which came after the Second World War. So it's beautiful how it's both like in terms of complexity and chronologically you get the same ordering. So this is just like perfect combination to read both the theory and the history of cryptography at the same time. And then maybe there could also be a cryptography podcast, which is something that you could do, in the evening. So you could literally combine these things to get the ultimate learning experience. So that's just an idea that I wanted to mention. And I really love this idea of giving people different tiers so that when you combine it, you get similar knowledge from different points of view, and you're able to, like, for example, directly apply your knowledge. Like another example could be doing an engineering course, and then also there could be of a lower mental tier, maybe a engineering kit, so that you could learn the theory and you could directly apply it, physically at the same time. Or another example would be, social stuff. So that's very, very important. So we could give people some learning resources, but then we could also give them meetups on that particular topics, or like online communities, right? So that they could, so essentially, yeah, giving people results in different mental tiers, because me personally, I've iterated that. That's a really cool way to learn. And finally, the last point is last point that came out of questioning our backend model or brainstorming new ideas. So nevertheless, I do think that our current system is a little bit susceptible to sort of attacks. I can imagine a Reddit post somewhere being like, hey guys, let's all bump up a reputation. Everyone, please upvote this particular, or vote for this particular metadata field on this particular resource. So like in our current system, like it's kind of a shelling game, right? But shelling games are also kind of, well, hackable. If an external person creates a shelling point for everybody to vote on, then if you vote on it, you're guaranteed to get a lot of reputation, because everybody else is voting on it because it's the shelling point. So again, I haven't thought this. We'll take 1 hour, 1.5 hour, how to actually revise our system so it's not susceptible to this. And in particular, it's very, very easy. We would have some sort of cap on reputation that you can gain from a particular resource. So this has a lot of advantages. Number one, it incentivizes people to add more resources, but also number two, it means that people can say, hey guys, let's all vote on this thing, and let's all just bump up our rep infinitely, because that actually wouldn't work. So we'll think this through. Let's take a 1 minute break, and let's get back and for some discussions. What do you guys think? So, yeah, let's take a 2 minute break, and let's get back soon. For some reason though, I can't. Oh, good, I found it. Okay. So I'll see you here in 2 minutes. Hey guys, we're back. So sorry for talking so much, but I think some good points were raised. What are your thoughts? Okay, so if everything is approved,
hello.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. All right. So for one, I think we should still have topics and I'm sorry, the all of the details of a particular resource format,
Yes.
price,
So
position.
sorry, I didn't make that clear. So we keep URL, topic, and learning dependency, unless there's a better way to encode it, which yeah, let's all think about and get back to each other tomorrow.
Yeah. So what I was thinking was we can still keep format, price, and position. We can have the algorithm on the backend running, which will suggest a user on what format it is, what price it is, and what position it should be. But the user should be able to edit that if the user thinks it should be something else.
I mean, let's decide this in the call tomorrow.
All right. The other thing is, I think, yeah, the cap on reputation is a good idea.
Hmm.
But I think initially we shouldn't have the cap. Obviously, we can put up the cap later on down the line as well. Why? Because initially, I mean, we would want people uh, to be to be sharing and inviting more and more people that will give us, you know, more users in the initial days. Later on,
Hmm.
we can have a cap and then make the reputation uh, a, 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 a better representation of the reputation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess what I like about the limited approach, while what we currently have is sort of unlimited. This limited approach is more interesting because it changes the distribution of the reputation. So in the current state, like here's what I'm trying to say. So reputation should definitely be correlated or should map to how useful the person has been to the Amos community, right? And I claim that somebody who's doing the thousandth review of one resource is not as and submitting the same information as everybody else, it's not as useful as if that person submitted a brand new resource, right? With metadata. So that's why I like some sort of more limited approach where the user is actually incentivized to, or like we put more value into like the people that come first in a resource. Yeah, I guess I guess that's the thing. So I mean, just to recap, our model still prefers people who come first, but it's like if I'm the thousandth person of a very popular resource, I'm still probably going to make more reputation from that than be the first person on a less popular, less well-known resource, right? Because it's all always future looking. It always matters how many reputation points come after me. And yeah, I think that's a little bit broken. So yeah, let's decide this tomorrow as well. But also happy to include that later on. It's just yeah, I think I need to think about this more.
So I
Cool.
want to say something.
Yeah, Mukul, go for it.
So it's about the scrapers seeding the databases. So what do you think about crawling the information from the web? Like we can crawl the Coursera website, and
Hmm.
as well as if we want to have the ebook and EPUB, something from the Amazon and other sites as well. So I have worked upon this kind of thing before as well. I wrote the crawler code. So I think this is a good idea, crawl the things to seed our databases. And also wanted to tell you that Coursera also provides the affiliate program. So if someone will go through our website, we can have some code mentioned in that link. And if he purchases this course from the Coursera from our link, then we can have some commission as well. So that's why I wanted to have a scraping of the resources as well, because if the user will submit the metadata, then it's not the possibility that he will tell us that you can include that code and you can get the affiliate benefit from that resource.
Right. I mean, I'm not against scraping per se, fundamentally. Obviously, it depends on the quality of our scraper.
Mhm.
But let's keep it in the backlog rather than something that we work on right now, because I think we should try to get the MVP out. But also, if you wanna take a look into this and try to find a scraper that would be good enough, then that's also fine.
So can you tell me what are other ways that you will seed your database?
I mean, human submission. So we already have quite a lot of resources. We have about like already even before we launched, we already have a database of resources that will take you about 8 years of full time
Mhm.
to complete. So yeah, we have this repo called Amos Initial Hydration,
Okay.
and we have quite a lot. I mean, this is the first 2 years of the Oxford Mathematical Institute, and every single course we have information about it, such as the chapters, the page, so then you can add hashtag page equals, so you actually get the exact page number, as well as the topics it's on and the learning dependencies.
Okay,
And
got it. Then
we also have the CS course for Cambridge. So we got quite a lot. Yeah. So I think that, I think if you want to look into this, go for it. Of course, I want to empower people and, totally give you power. But I think the MVP for humans to submit. Yeah.
right. I agree with you totally. Actually, I didn't know that you have already a database. So this is okay. We can have this thing in backlog.
Perfect. Sounds great. Let's keep that in mind, and let's keep it in the backlog. And I also wanted to suggest that we meet tomorrow. So yeah, there's a lot on my plate, but it's not just on my plate. So why don't we all think about these topics? And should we do back end and front end call separately, or should we do another big product call? How do you guys prefer it? I think it might make sense to reconvene again in a big group to finalize everything, and then we can have calls on Thursday separate for the backend team to create the issues and see what everyone's going to be working on, and the same exact thing for the front end team.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's okay.
Perfect. In that case, thanks a lot, guys, for attending this call. Really appreciate it. Let me know if I really tried to explain everything that I was thinking about, but it's possible that it wasn't that understandable. But one thing that I want to be doing, there's a lot of things in my personal backlog, but two things out of many are, I want to set up a survey that I can, ideally anonymous, that I can send out to everyone who's part of the team or part of the Slack, and to give us sort of give the whole team really feedback on what they see as good things on this project, as well as what they would improve, because there's no better way to improve than to hear what's working and what's not working. So think about that as well. And then I was also thinking about, so that we can actually get to know each other more, doing a short podcast series whereby the podcast would be, 20 to 40 minutes. And it would be essentially a discussion on, the topic of the other person, their life experience, what they worked on, what they enjoyed, what brought them to Savio, how they see the project in the future. And then other people could listen to it and could learn more about the team, as well as, obviously it would be public, so anyone could listen to it and learn more about the team behind the project. So let me know if you think that's a good idea. So yeah, I think I'll, the idea is this stuff takes literally 40 minutes per week and could be cool. So I might do it. Thanks a lot, guys. I'm gonna stop the recording now. So thanks for watching this video. If you want to contribute to the project of changing the way the world educates and learns, please visit www.savio.org and get in touch. See you later.